My name is Claudette Sutherland.
You're an actress.
I was, I guess I still am, you could say, although I don't do it anymore. Maybe today a little bit.
When you were a child, did you always want to be an actor?
Sure. Here's the deal. I grew up in a very peculiar way. My parents raced greyhounds all through the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s and 50s and 60s. But I grew up in the backseat of a car because in those years, greyhound racing, which was much more of a sport than it isn't anything anymore, it's all about gambling. But in those years, it had just come out of the 20s and the 30s, and most of the people who were doing it were these boys from the farms, and they were anxious to get off the farm, and they had cars now, so they got off the farm, took a couple of dogs, and began this kind of itinerant way. By the time it got to me, I was born in '39. They were well underway, but it was still seasonal. In other words, you couldn't go to one place and race dogs. It was always outdoors. So we traveled the country 3 and 4 times a year with all these greyhounds behind us, driving from Miami in the wintertime where it was seasonal up to Oregon for a few races and back to Miami. And so that was the circuit we did. What would usually happen is, the trip from Miami to Oregon was a long one, and that was mostly on 2-lane highways because some of it was before the interstate. And we would be pulling a trailer of maybe 25 or 30 greyhounds, and you had to stop and exercise them 4 times a day. It was insane. This was a really interesting, really American subculture that hardly anybody knows anything about because nobody ever wrote about it, but that's kind of what I'm doing now. So anyway, back to why I became an actress is I think, the dog tracks were really exciting. They were lights, and they were bands in those years. And they were boys marching in white outfits, and I just like being in light and crowds. So I think that's what happened. Isn't that something? I went to a little girls' school in the Midwest named Stevens College. That was in Columbia, Missouri. It had a fabulous theater program. My father was a farm boy. He went, yeah, well, what the hell, you sing, you dance. But my mother thought that was fine. She was saying, oh, this is important. I think you need to do this. Here, I'll make you a dress. We'll go to the opera. Okay, fine. I was accepted at Yale as a special student without a degree. What that meant that I went into the drama school very, very young, that graduate school there, which had a big reputation at the time. So I went into it really at my mother's urging because she thought it was a good opportunity. Looking back, I feel I was too young. And so I left there and I went to New York. Someone called me from an agency and said, do you want to audition for a Broadway show called How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying? I said, sure. I said, what do I do? And I said, I have to be on my lunch hour. They said, okay. So I auditioned in the Lunt-Fontanne Theater, and I said, what do they want? And they said, well, they want somebody to belt. And I said, okay. So the piano player from downtown, I said, why don't you put together the write-outs from like 6 songs? And I'll just sing those because they'll be really loud. Just put them all together. So he did. So I go into the stage, and I would never do anything like this now, but I had so much fun. I sang the last 8 bars of God Bless America, Swanee, I'm Shy, Rose's Turn, Johnny One Note, and there was one other. I can't remember. But it was just a hoot. I mean, it was so stupid, and they thought it was great, so I got the job. So I was the original Smitty in How to Succeed. One day, I'm driving on the FDR highway in my car, and it said, and now,
well, here it is
from How to Succeed in Business Without Trying, Claudette Sutherland singing, and I went, oh! I mean, I pulled over there and went, wait, I'm on the radio. It was so adorable because I was on the radio, and that was a big deal.
Now she's thinking.
In retrospect, I don't think I made as much of it as I could. I was positioned to be big musical comedy star, and I don't think I could come up to it. I lost confidence. I kept questioning why me, why so young, as that kind of thing. So I lost some years in there, but that's okay. I got them back. Right at the end of the run of How to Succeed, I married a man who was a sound man for the show. And one day my husband said, "You know something? If you live on a boat, you don't have to pay property taxes." I went, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "So what do you think?" He said, "Well, maybe we ought to live on a boat." I said, "Well, maybe we ought to." So we bought this really outrageous thing that wasn't really a house. It was really a boat. And we lived on it for 5 years up in Pelham Bay. It floated. That was about it, until it didn't. When I was 29, I was 4 months pregnant with my second baby. My poor husband was locked up in the psych ward at Columbia Presbyterian because he was a bipolar and nobody knew what that meant. I was living on this 54-foot long, 21-foot wide, 2-story houseboat in Pelham Bay, and it was sinking. So anyway, eventually I moved back into the city, and I lived on West End Avenue. I remarried, eventually. Then I got divorced again. I'm sorry. It shouldn't be funny. But my second son was a boy who had some neurological impairment. He was severely learning disabled. He required a lot of attention. His arrival in my life was an extraordinary event that I was totally unprepared for, and that I then had to reshape everything I thought and every way that I reacted and what I did to serve his ability to comprehend the world. He was sort of fringe autistic, but not so that it interfered with his ability to socialize. He learned that from me. School was always difficult for him, but he applied himself. He was somewhat obsessive, which stood him in good stead because then he would really work hard. The world was structured for him when he was in school. When he was out of school, it was not. And he very slowly, over 5 years, began to diminish. The world became too much for him. He was like the Chauncey Gardiner character in Being There. I was his translator. I made the world make sense to him. And I taught him a lot of social skills, and he had a really good life. He was well accepted. He was a very, very limited person in many ways who was living a life that was very full and rich. When he decided to take his own life, he tried a couple of times. And then when he succeeded, and by the way, that had always been something that I knew was possible. So it wasn't like I was saying, "Oh boy, we can do it. I was saying, I hope we can do it. I hope this works out. So when I lost him, I really, I think that death really, really straightens you out. My father had committed suicide a few years before as a very old man. My father was very old. He was living with me, and he was done. For me not to respect both of their decisions is to say they didn't matter. They really mattered. And my son had a wonderful life until he didn't. My father, his decision was based completely on his utilitarian view of life and capacity and capability. He had lived around dogs who were livestock. He was from a farm. When something didn't work anymore, you got rid of it. When something didn't work anymore, you went, that's it. And that's what he did. Oddly enough, I feel very privileged, but the other thing I feel is I need to stay alive. I'm the one who's alive, and I need to be on this earth, and I need to do my work, whatever that may be. This is a weird, weird life, but I'm just going to be the best I can in it and just show up, there's more to come. When I came out here to LA, I was in my 50s, and, I knew that I could get some work out here, guest starring and stuff like that. So I did, and it was okay. But then that began to slip because I was a woman in that sort of slot. And there was nothing I could do about that. But I decided that I would be good at teaching writing. The reason that I could be good at that is because I was good at acting. Because they're all the same thing. They're all, you just beg and borrow from all the things. It's all about process. I know how to show people how to do the thing. I'm a capable person. Like my parents both could fix things and rearrange things and do it. So I can do that. I can cook. I'm a really good cook. I'm a good gardener. And well, those are all the same things. I'm pretty good at relationship, though it might seem that not seem, but I am. And those things are all the same. They have all the same attributes in many ways. I started teaching little classes at my home about 15 years ago. When I finally loosened myself from acting, then I was able to focus much more on this other work, and instead of doing, is the phone going to ring? And so I went, no, now this is what I do. So now I have 4 classes a week in my home. 6 books have come out of the classes, so that's good. And I do individual work with people. I do one-on-one. If you have a project you're working on and you are stuck, then you come to me and I'll help you out. A lot of the population I work with are young women in their 30s, 20s, 30s, early 40s. That makes me so happy because it makes me so tender toward the girl that I was, I mean, because when I was a girl, I'm doing, I can do anything, and you go, no, you were a young girl. You were trying so hard, and so I feel more kindly to her. When I think about the fact that I should have done this or I should have done that, I have to say, oddly, I look at the lives that come to me and want to tell their stories. I'm changing their way of looking at their own stories. And when I'm gone, they're going to have those stories. So I will have affected some people in really intimate ways, not big ways, but intimate ways. And that will be a wonderful thing. Wonderful. When I was 60, I went, I'm 60. And I realized, that was a big deal. But one of the things I realized about previous birthdays, 50, 40, 30, 20, is in most of those birthdays you say, whoa, I'm 30. Well, that means I'm going to, you're looking forward in a linear fashion saying, well, I'm going to, you get to 60 and you go, well, what I did was I went around to 90. And I looked back, I said, hey, how do I want this last 30 years to look? It was different. It made me perceive it differently and have it, have it.
That's a great idea.
Isn't it? You'll see. It's a great idea.